So I always try to listen to your feedback, things you want to see. The why a Superman game is so hard to make video is probably the best performing video I have on the channel. I know you guys like that. And I saw a recommendation that I make a similar video for The Flash. I wanted to talk about The Flash today, why it's so hard to make a video game for him. This doesn't mean that none exist. I believe there is a very old, obscure Flash game from years ago, back in the 90s. And he has appeared in certain Justice League games, DC superhero games, and fighters. It's not that he's impossible to bring onto the gaming screen. This is just why it's hard to do so. Before we get started, I think it's worth mentioning that if you haven't seen it in the past, there is a canceled Flash game from Bottlerocket Entertainment that actually looked like it was shaping up to be pretty dang good. I'm not sure how it would have fared in the very end, but there were a lot of passionate people behind that project, so definitely look that up if you want to see what a Flash game could look like in and of itself. So I think it would be easy enough to say Flash is OP and just call it a day. Just walk away and be like, well, that's it. It's kind of like Superman. What are we going to do with this? But Superman does have some just straight up weaknesses that people can take advantage of. The fact is that while Kryptonians are incredibly powerful, there are other outer space forces that are more powerful than them. Obviously, in a fight with Darkseid, Doomsday, he could die, characters like that. And Flash could too, but it's not that often that you see Flash going up against characters like that on his own. There also isn't some magical green rock, and yes, it's not magical, I know, but a green rock that essentially you can hold out at Flash, and if you're close enough, weaken him. Flash has weaknesses, but they're weird. Flash's weaknesses really seem to depend on the writer, the continuity, and which Flash it is. Now, Barry and Wally, even Jay, they display different levels of affinity and abilities with the Speed Force, although there's not really any hard and fast rules that say that, no, just because Wally did this thing and we haven't seen Barry do it, he can't. There's nothing like that, it's just different adaptations, so I'm going to try to talk about the Speed Force itself and what a lot of speedsters can do here. Obviously, the first one is that they run insanely fast. So how do we transfer that onto a game screen? Well, we could put the entire game in bullet time, which is slow-mo for those of you who haven't seen The Matrix, and that could work. It would make for a very slow game, but it would be true to the Flash's character and how he would see the world around him, right? But the problem is, at the end of the day, this is still a game, a video game. It is not a movie, it is not a comic. The player needs to have agency and be able to interact with this in a fun way. So to make them play an entire game in slow-mo probably wouldn't be fun. You could do what Bottlerocket Entertainment looks like they were trying to do, where you'd have different levels of speed, and once you hit max, things would get slow-mo. That's certainly a way to do it, but even if you look at some of their footage from their games, or from their alpha build of this game, there were things that were a little disorienting that probably would have been worked out at the end, but again, this is not to say it's impossible, it's just, this is a hard problem to tackle. On top of that, let's say Flash runs into someone at super speed. Does it just do nothing? Does it kill them? Is it a game over? Can Flash trip? Probably not. That's beside the point. This isn't Super Smash Bros. Brawl. But there's a lot of things that go into that fast running that people have to think about when they're designing a game about him. I mean, even consider velocity. If Flash punches someone at normal speed like a normal human being, it hurts. If Flash punches someone at near infinite velocity, his hand goes straight through their head and they're murdered. They're dead. Flash is like Spider-Man and Superman. He has to physically pull his punches. Now, how do you give the player those abilities? It's not easy. Also, Flash has more powers than just guy who runs fast. That's a super simplification of the Flash. Flash can also vibrate through walls. That's a problem that Bottlerocket Entertainment tried to work through, and if you want more information about that game, there's a really interesting breakdown from, I believe it's Unseen64, which is a YouTube channel that talks a lot about canceled games and games that have never come to market. It's really cool to check out, but this studio was working on that idea of how can we have Flash pass through objects. If you wanted to be real to the Flash's powers, he'd be able to pass through anything. I mean, he could just vibrate his way through a surface by moving his molecules apart in and out and vibrating and passing right through it. While he's not coherent, but he is still coherent. I mean, his molecules don't just break apart and he dies. So you'd have to find a way to do that. And even this studio back in 2008 was having issues with that. I mean, there was the idea of how do we show what surfaces someone can vibrate through? I mean, Flash could do it through any. So do we have him have that power or not? Or is it like something like in Superman Returns, where technically Superman could knock down all of Metropolis, but we're just going to make the buildings invulnerable and ignore that? It's a problem with these superpowered characters where you just have to start picking and choosing things to ignore. You have to pick and choose ideas to just be like, we're just going to toss that out. I mean, the fact of the matter is, speedsters can even travel through time. We see this all the time with a character like Eobard Thawne. Professor Zoom, this character who is able to use the Speed Force and manipulate it to change things in the timeline. There's a lot of tie-ins to Flashpoint Paradox with that, and if you're not much of a comic reader, there's a great movie, animated version of it out there. There is a lot here to break down with these speedsters. Other than just time travels, there are a lot of different Flashes with the ability to control like lightning or electrical based things. It depends on what it is. And this shows up in the Flash TV show. Obviously, again, that show is sort of an amalgamation of different versions of the Flash's powers, and it's CW, so they just kind of do what they want. But it's weird because depending on Wally, Barry, Jay, like I said, these things come back and forth and they sort of change depending on who's writing them, which Flash we're talking about. So on top of that, it's not just like Clark Kent. Superman's powers are fairly consistent. I'm not saying they always are. They tend to change depending on a multiverse or a version. Like All-Star Superman's strength might be vastly different to the strength of Frank Miller's Year One Superman. But overall, they're not constantly introducing new powers for Superman still. Every couple of years, the Speed Force pulls something out like, oh, no. You thought that's all the Flash could do? Well, now he can do this. And they just come up with something. So there isn't really a big consistency to Flash's moveset in general. There's also the fact that he's not invulnerable, but he heals ridiculously fast. I mean, he's a lot like Logan, Wolverine in that way, where it's hard to kill the Flash. You can do it. You can beat the Flash down and kill him. If he just stood there and let a firing squad kill him, yeah, he'd go down. But the Flash is never going to do that. And even when he does take physical damage, he's able to regenerate really quickly. He has an insanely fast health regen. So how does that transfer to a video game? Again, do we sacrifice every single bit of a challenge and just say, whatever, it's fun? You can do that. A game developer could decide to do so, but the problem is, how does that actually appeal to a mass market at all? It might appeal to mainline Flash fans, but at the end of the day, consumers don't want to play a game where their interactivity doesn't matter at all, where there's zero challenge. Yes, a lot of people don't want Dark Souls, but a lot of people also don't want Telltale in terms of like, the game kind of plays itself. Nobody's really looking for that, especially in a game that's a superhero power fantasy. On top of that, even if he couldn't just heal immediately, the Flash also has a lot of kinetic manipulation where he can sort of rob objects of their power, essentially. So like the Flash can be running, a bullet could technically hit him, and depending on how the writer is deciding to do this, the kinetic energy from that bullet could be added into what the Flash is able to do. Again, it depends on which Flash this is, but it's worth noting that depending on who the writer is, they can technically be like, he's bulletproof right now. There's so much here. It's just crazy. And the Flash has always been one of my favorite superheroes, but the lack of clear weaknesses, it does make it hard to actually do something with him in that way. I mean, I suppose you could have something like the Gorilla Grodd type threat. Obviously, there are times where a character like that or a psychic character who is able to use mental manipulation is able to beat a speedster. That can certainly happen. But even that, there have been times where writers will be like, well, Flash is thinking so fast that it doesn't matter. He can just think through that, or he can outpace a actual psychic's abilities because he thinks that fast. The Speed Force, in a way, is the easiest way to break it down, and someone's going to get mad and say it's not magic, but the easiest way to break it down is it's speed magic. It's not really, but it's sort of this force that writers can take and make it so Barry or Bart or Wally or Jay, all these characters can do whatever they need them to do in that interpretation. And so then it comes down to, do we nerf the Flash? I suppose we could, but at what point of nerfing a character is he no longer who we say he is? At what point of nerfing Superman? At what point of nerfing Flash are they no longer Superman and the Flash? You know, where do you draw that line? Where is that distinction? At the end of the day, are these characters just too overpowered? I honestly think no. I think that a game can be made about these characters, but it's not as easy as making a character about a mortal man. Now, I don't want to undersell Rocksteady or WB Games Montreal's work in things like the Arkham series, but at the end of the day, Batman can get shot in the head and just drop. At the end of the day, a fall from 50 stories would kill the man. At the end of the day, it's a man fighting other men, other mortal people. And the Flash just really isn't that. I mean, characters like the Flash and like Superman are more akin to gods. And it's hard to give a god his game while keeping it a fun game. You can bring in things like emotional weaknesses, but at what point do players no longer care that, oh, I need to defend that person? Because do that many people really think escort missions and defense missions are fun? Not really. It's a lot better translated into a comic book or a movie where the Flash has to save some random person out in the street about to get hit by a car, or somebody who's about to be shot, than it is in a game where it would just become repetitive and old hat. So I'm not entirely sure how you do this. I'm not a game developer, but I just wanted to take a look for a few minutes at why that is such a hard thing to do in my opinion, and why I think we haven't seen a truly great Flash game, and why very few are made, even though he does appear in things like Injustice, where you can sort of pair up other characters with him. I think fighters, they work a little differently than your average superhero action RPG. So hey, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are there other things that you think would make it really hard to make a Flash game? Do you think I'm overthinking this? Should they just nerf the character? Or do you think that game developers are lazy and they should be able to incorporate the Flash's infinite move list into a game and be able to make this? I am honestly curious at what you think, because while making this, I sort of went back and forth on what do I think about this? Do I think it's possible? Do I not? Where could I see this showing up? So I'm interested to see your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know. Like the video if you enjoyed what you saw. Subscribe for more content. I love having you around. And hey, join the community. Check out the Reddit. Check out the Patreon. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.